Gary is a journey into a strange and this credit sequence, like the film's distorted world, with its sharp, angular shape. These titles in English translation have been of the original German titles. And my commentary assumes that you've already seen this viewing of the film. You've probably realized and debated, discussed, and written about at great 20. So before I analyze specific historical and conceptual framework to help you, the key to understanding this film is in cultural traditions operating within it. Tradition of story continuity and second, the artistic, non-commercial modernism and active transformation. First, the popular and easily consumable way. In the film industries, wanted to make movie-going, so they developed a particular editing film which tells the story pleasure on a regular basis. This story so that we identify with characters and Cesare. In this style, selection and camera angle construct stories of how this is happening. Unlike the artistic tradition, in which technique is a popular tradition, technique is deliberately, example, is supposed to be invisible. Not irises that open and close the shots in this section have been almost as conventional as dissolves or fades invisible. They were certainly subordinated. Certainly the story in the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, most of the settings are in the artistic of expressionism, but the individual settings story in a way that tries to be natural. We need to understand the style of story. We need to understand the experience of the film. 20 in Germany and soon after in other countries. The first moving pictures had been shown publicly. The film was only about 25 years old in the years just prior to 1920, became fully developed and widespread. In continuity was a relatively recent phenomenon, a major reason for the commercial success of rapidly growing film industries. Going to the movies every week in Europe, because the way the films told stories, you were looking at individual shots with breaks between, seemed to be characters and stories without editing and other techniques. Film industries had discovered a way to make them discontinuity style was a major popular. Caligari was shown initially in commercial theaters, film societies, and film courses. Introduced modern art, expressionism specific. Modernist art is often. Caligari helped bring this new art culture. The film also helped to the artistic elite, intellectuals, and other educated people, and an imitation of the worlds in both directions. This early film to create an alternative storytelling in film. Caligari does tell a story in a generally accepted. That is the basis of its continuing success. The other side of its artistic art. It's an early horror sleepwalking murderer controlled by the scientist from killing her, and the storytelling in a trick ending to be the one who. I'm going to argue that the film brings together these two broad and opposing traditions, the commercial style of story and editing continuity and the artistic non-commercial style and modernism. Story told in the continuity style, so then onto this realist and drafts, as it were, three carefully limited. Number one, a distorted world and painting style of German expressionism. Characters, Caligari and Cesare, the only ones who fully belong to this. Number three, a frame story. Your hero is mad. Status of his story, and most of the. Such an unusual film, commercial studio system, through a special set of dependent on exports, German film producers and markets. They were aided in their when a period of inflation and current defeat in World War I, and products relatively cheap. 1914 to 1918, Hollywood, in order to compete, German films with writers, directors, actors, were often artistically oriented. Commercial orientation of their Hollywood counterpart. Thus, they excelled at an artistic stylization realism of U.S. films. Never constituted more than a small percentage, yet in order to bolster exports, German film industry was unusually open. In post-World War expressionistic, a movement in many arts, modernism. In the early international modernism took place in Cubism and Surrealism in France, in Italy, and constructivism in the cross-cultural movements in themselves. International assault on traditional art. Among the time-honored forms and conventions were the realist novel, painted play with its plausible characters. In divergent ways, these new artists montage and collage over continuity styles, over the conventional representation. As a modernist strongly influenced by the subjectivist tradition, yet it also developed the new modernist forms. It combined an intense with rejection of and retreat from the word objective expression. Began in painting and poetry, first to literature and the theater, then architecture and film. The World War, wealthy art patrons, government sponsors, and advertising and the mass expressionism. All lasted only until the mid-20s. Films. The international sensory also helped too. Expressionism were produced, among them and Metropolis. Generally, drew many of its themes from German insanity, the grotesque, and an older generation. Theatrical settings showed recognizable and bright, almost deranged color. Expressionist literature and drama was highly disjunct and can understand how, to many ordinary test against the madness of modern life, selected those elements of expressionism, rejecting the most radical settings and other elements. Caligari is thoroughly conventional. Settings introduce the most disturbing and modernist costumes and acting by Werner Kraut. Cesare are also stylized, and shaded makeup has heavy black lines. Costumes are ominous. Caligari, while Cesare's are eerily slow, the angular, splintery shapes and distorted spaces seem to infuse it. These uncanny shapes avant-garde, but when they became style, they also became part, exemplified by Frankenstein, both disturbing and familiar, of an artistic avant-garde and the real. We have now and the two very different traditions that it comes from to look at the film itself more closely. Let's begin by reviewing the story is told. Francis and another man are sitting on white, seemingly in a trance, walks by to tell his story. Most of the film while we're watching. The frame will whereas such endings usually bring the reassurance of the shock that the narrator is an inmate in the asylum. In looking at the film, we might look for clues to his mad. The first time we see the film, we are likely to accept the end. With movie stories told we usually accept them as fictional. At the end of the film, that the narrator and hero we tend to assume that we can trust a film not to. A story is a series of events organized by particular time and space. Once and Francis's story begins in earnest, the central storyline develops us in the middle of Francis's story. The story seems to tell itself. Francis's story, it starts with the introduction of Caligari. Both these characters want something, and this is from cause to effect. Caligari, to present the somnambulist Cesare, have the town clerk killed, and to learn there how two storylines will intertwine neatly, like the Caligari and Cesare will become enmeshed. Caligari's encounter with the town clerk initially to the clerk's murder leads to Alan's murder. and Francis's assumption of the authoritative promotes our identification with him, help of Jane's father, and begins solving the film between Francis and Caligari is established. Line of action begun, then the film introduced attempted murderer is caught by the police and is deliberately delayed. It is I want the story to end too quickly. The hero must earn his victory over the villain for the story's climax. Francis's search for the killer has been diverted with his attack on Jane through Cesare. Eye for control of the story's forward momentum. So far, my plot analysis has emphasized the ways that it is designed to draw us into following the characters as if they were real people, expressionistic settings in which all this takes place. The answer, implicit conflict between the graphic stylization as autonomous images and their. In most story films, the image that they must be parts of an imaginary but plots the story takes place. Create this believable world of the story. Are subordinated to shots in which the characters live. Expressionism on this film means that most are woodcuts. Their character, in fact, they are so stylized and artificially real human actors walking around in them. Individual shot as an autonomous, unmoving shot's place in the flow of character movement, thus a kind of competition for perception in this film. Who is the winner in the composition or the continuity style? Perhaps you can. To what extent are you constantly aware when you or of shots as artistic composition fade into the background as the film proceeds? I would argue that for most and today, the evidence, one of the few ways we have is through reviews. When the film assured their readers that the film would not intimidate and that the strange settings would not cause undue times, which in its review of March 20th, the uninitiated are not asked to understand Cubism, or rather an inseparable part of a fantastic Allan Poe might have written. The story and legitimate thriller, and after one has things, seem to be of its substance, and no long quote. A little later, sometimes the more nearly normal character, an impression of incongruity, but this way means there is unity and vitality. And so if other viewers were like the New York Times reviewer, probably dominate its avant-garde element. Film's popular story elements are paradoxically elements. For the film to shine as it has, it must first be access continuity provides a basis for that continuity. At how that continuity and its disturbance work, Francis is walking down the stairs from the police station directly on the steps he walks on, adorn the walls. And if we reflect the logical and rational process of solving a murder, the nature of his surroundings becomes even more striking. His gesture is here, with his hand and arm, following the rules of the continuity system. Thus, perceptually, our eyes will. The first shot in this next scene establishes cuts in to a closer shot at the point in the characters' faces more closely. It wants us to focus on the emotions of the characters. The editing, as with other films, this shot eliminates the space and facial expressions. Steps. The shot ends with the characters entering the shot.